What's poppin', everybody? This is Tom and Joey Entertainment. I am Joey and welcome back to the Realest News. This is a weekly segment where Tom and I keep it real and discuss the most important news stories going on all around the world in order to keep you informed. Now, you're probably wondering why I don't have my big headset on, and that is because unfortunately Tom is unable to join us today. If you don't follow us on Twitter, which you should be, Tom's house was unfortunately robbed over the weekend, so he's dealing with various repercussions regarding that. But nonetheless, that means that you're going to have to look at my handsome mug the whole video. So although the main story is about Trump's missile launch last week on the airbase in Syria, let's do a little recap of the week. On Monday, April 10th, Alabama Governor Robert Bentley resigned from office in the face of impeachment hearings over accusations he tapped state resources to facilitate and hide an alleged affair with a former aide. Text messages and phone recordings proving the alleged affair were collected by his now ex-wife.
I stand behind you, and I put my arms around you, and I put my hands on your breast.
Bentley made the announcement shortly after he was booked into county jail after pleading guilty for failing to file a major contribution report and knowingly converting campaign contributions for personal use. On Sunday, April 9th, otherwise known as Palm Sunday on the Christian calendar, 2 deadly bombings targeted Christian churches in Egypt. The first attack was at a church service in Tanta, Egypt, killing at least 27 people and wounding 78 others. The second attack was a suicide bomber outside a cathedral in Alexandria, killing 18 civilians and at least 4 police officers. ISIS later claimed responsibility for the attacks as the terrorist group continues to lose territory in the Middle East. On Monday, April 10th, Neil Gorsuch was sworn in at the White House as the 113th Supreme Court Justice of the United States. Gorsuch's confirmation came after a long battle between Democrats and Republicans within the Senate, and it is regarded as the first major victory for the Trump administration. Gorsuch said he was humbled by his appointment to the High Court and promised to be, quote, faithful servant of the Constitution and laws of this great nation. And hands down the most viral story of the week, on Sunday, April 9th, a man who refused to be bumped from a plane was forcefully wrestled out of his seat and dragged down the aisle by his arms, causing massive outrage across all media spectrums. United Airlines CEO issued an apology following the controversy, saying, like you, I continue to be disturbed by what happened on this flight, and I deeply apologize to the customer forcibly removed and all the customers aboard. The security officer involved in the incident has been placed on leave, and the Federal Transportation Department is investigating whether the airline complied with rules regarding overbooking. Now, we're going to do that recap every single week. There's so many stories on the news cycle that it's hard to keep up, and we wanted to be able to focus on one main story while also keeping you informed on everything that's also important going on in the world. Now, that being said, let's get into our main discussion.
Tonight I ordered a targeted military strike on the airfield in Syria from where the chemical attack was launched.
President Trump announcing that for the first time the United States has taken direct military action against the Syrian regime.
Now, as Trump said, he launched the missile attack as a response to the horrific chemical attack that was launched last week by the Assad regime on the civilian people. The significance of that is because it's the first military action towards the Syrian regime. I mean, the Syrian civil war has been going on since 2011. Former President Obama never took action against Syria. Now, you're probably thinking, what's really the significance of Trump launching this missile attack? Is if you've seen the video and the pictures of the horrific chemical attack that happened last week, any normal person would be furious about that and want it to do something in order to stop it. But this is the significance of Trump's attack.
The attack also a startling about-face for President Trump, who has repeatedly argued against military intervention in Syria.
Why do we can't let ISIS and Syria fight and let Russia, they're in Syria already, let them fight ISIS?
Tweeting repeatedly after the last major chemical attack in Syria 4 years ago that the United States should stay out of the conflict, and insisting that President Obama needs congressional approval before taking action.
So that's where this discussion begins. I mean, there's a lot of moving pieces, and that's why it's so interesting to me, because there's so many different points of views, so many different actors, political interests, different countries involved. Really, the entire world is involved when it involves the United States, especially when it involves the United States launching a missile attack on another country. But Jim Acosta, the CNN White House correspondent, tweeted after the incident that a senior administration official said that the strike should not be interpreted as a further campaign to remove Assad, and that it was more about the administration showing their unacceptability of Assad's attack. But that's what's really odd to me, is that they're saying that it's showing that it's unacceptability of this Assad chemical attack, and it's kind of like a threat in a way of these missile attacks, and not to really do any significant damage, because the Department of Defense released pictures showing the extent of the damage that the missile attack did, and you look at it, I mean, there's a few damaged airplane carriers, and the weird thing is that the specific Syrian airfield that launched the chemical attack, they store these planes in like this roofed garage where it's open on both sides. Damage just seemed like it hit the top of the aircraft hangars and really did no damage to any planes, did not do any damage to any runway or the capability of Assad to carry out airstrikes from that airbase, because not even 12 hours after the attack was committed, Syria and Assad were running airstrikes off of this airbase. We launch upwards of 59 Tomahawk missiles, barely do any damage. The whole goal of the operation was to show Assad that his attacks on the Syrian people and against civilians are not acceptable, but yet he launched airstrikes from that airbase onto the same town where the chemical attacks were conducted. So really, I've taken a whole 180 with this whole situation, because after seeing the horrific pictures and the horrific videos from the chemical attack last week, anyone with a heart really would want to try and do whatever they possibly can or support anything that could prevent that from happening ever again. I'm not one for violence. I am always one for diplomacy and cooperation over violence, but like I said, just after seeing those horrific pictures and videos, even I supported the missile strike when it first came out, because they were releasing information that the attack was precise, it was accurate, destroyed all targets. They said all but maybe 2 or 3 missiles hit their targets. But then you see the intel that comes out afterwards, and especially, like I said, the fact that they still ran airstrikes from that same airbase, it really looked like it did nothing. And then you look at the grand scheme of things, what it means in like domestically and what it means internationally. It puts the United States in a situation where the missile attack doesn't really seem that it was that beneficial. It was kind of just seen as this empty threat to show our military might, to show how big our military dick is. And what's concerning about this is back in 2013, as the video said, Trump claimed that Obama shouldn't go into Syria, it shouldn't attack Syria, and it shouldn't commit a military strike without congressional approval, which is exactly what Trump did. 48 hours after the chemical attack happened, Trump's mindset completely flips and he launches this missile strike. So kind of looking at what it means domestically and how it's perceived within the United States, it's even more interesting to think about what the foreign implications are. Now, obviously, if you don't know, Russia has backed Assad and the Syrian regime all throughout the Syrian civil war. Russia has really been the biggest partner and military aid for Assad and Syria. And for me, that's where this whole situation gets really interesting. Now, again, these are my opinions. I've done a lot of reading and a lot of research on this whole topic, and I've gathered a lot of information that has given me the ability to formulate this opinion. Now, it's going to, maybe to a few of you, it's going to sound a little bit conspiracy theory, but it'll definitely get you thinking. When you look at the one big situation and the one big problem that no one is discussing anymore is the fact of Trump and Russia being buddy-buddy. You know, I've seen several articles, headlines, is that the one thing, and Eric Trump, Trump's own son, came out and said that the one thing that this Syrian attack does is put this notion that Russia and the United States, or Russia and Trump, are in cahoots to bed. And when the videos and the pictures came out showing the extent of the damage to the airfield, that's really when my mind started going. We launched this missile strike. This really kind of rids this whole problem of Russia and Trump, because Russia backs Syria. So if Trump attacks Syria, then it means that Trump and Russia, they can't be in cahoots, because that means that they're not on the same page, and it kind of deflects from that narrative. And then the administration comes out and says that this is not a further campaign to oust Assad, this is not a further campaign in Syria, we're going to keep the same foreign policy with Syria and just have the main goal to combat ISIS. So no damage to the airfield, damage to Russia and United States relations as we see it, or as the media reports it. There's not going to be really any change of foreign policy, and this was kind of a one-time strike. Shadier things have been done in the US government and governments around the world, so it's pretty interesting to think that if Trump, Assad, and Putin were all in cahoots to the point where Russia and Assad said, okay, you launch this missile strike, show that you're not buddy-buddy with Russia, it's not going to do a whole lot of damage, you're not going to change your foreign policy, we're still going to carry out airstrikes and still do our duty to defeat ISIS or to fight against the rebels as Assad claims it. So it's definitely pretty interesting. Now you're probably thinking, why is Russia implicated so much into this situation when it comes to the chemical attack? And I'll let Secretary of State Rex Tillerson explain that a little more.
It is also clear Russia has failed to uphold the agreements that had been entered into under multiple UN Security Council resolutions. These agreements stipulated Russia as the guarantor of a Syria free of chemical weapons, that they would also locate, secure, and destroy all such armaments in Syria. Stockpiles and continued use demonstrate that Russia has failed in its responsibility to deliver on its 2013 commitment.
There was a pact conducted with the UN and the United States that back in 2013, Russia conducted a survey within the Syrian government to make sure that they were completely rid of all their chemical weapons. And Russia signed off on that. They finalized that as that was the truth. So you have Russia's name on the dotted line saying that Syria had no chemical weapons and possessed no capability to launch chemical chemical strikes, and yet this chemical attack happens. But this is another interesting point, because you look at, why would Assad do this? You know it's going to be reported on the massive stage. There's not really any military advantage, especially because he launched the attacks on civilians, and really there were no rebel stationed where the attack was. There was no military advantage. There was no political advantage. Why would he launch these attacks knowing that the entire world would gain attention from it? Killing civilians, it would just be horrific. 99% of other countries would just condemn the attack and support anything to stop it. So why would Assad do this? And at first I didn't know, and that's what kind of added into this controversy with Trump, Russia, and Putin, where if Assad had no reason to launch these chemical strikes, did he actually launch these chemical strikes? But the more I read and the more I dived into the conflict in Syria and the way that Assad conducts his actions within Syria, a big reason why he could launch these chemical strikes is to scare the Syrian people. I mean, as a dictator, your main goal is to show the people of your country your power is insurmountable to them to overcome. So if you launch these chemical strikes, if you show the capability that you are in a no-holds-barred, you are going to do everything to defeat the opposition mentality, people are going to be scared, the rebels are going to be scared, and maybe they'll lose morale and not be as strong of fighters, or maybe they might give up altogether. So like I said, there's a lot of moving pieces, from Russia and Putin to Assad and Syria to Trump and the US and all the countries that supported the missile strike last week and all the countries that condemned it. The only countries that really condemned it were Russia, Syria, Iran, and North Korea, those big four. And when you look at the countries that opposed the attack, government officials came out and said that this is only going to hurt the fight against terrorism and hurt the fight against ISIS. I would argue that's complete bullshit. From everything I've learned and everything I've read about the mentality of terrorism and these radical groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, we said it before and we'll say it again, we do not link these terrorist groups with any sort of religion. They're not radical Islamic terrorists. They are radical terrorists, and they are organizations, and that's what they are, so that's what we're going to call them. They use this Syrian civil war, and especially the Iraq war as well, as a main recruiting tool. When the United States, Russia, and Syria conduct these airstrikes, and yes, some airstrikes might kill ISIS combatants, but so many of them are killing civilians as well. And you look at this mentality and this recruiting tool for these terrorists, and they show that, oh, look at all these countries, look at the West, they're committing these airstrikes against you. They don't care about you. They're just power hungry, and they just want to defeat the enemy by any means necessary. They don't care about you. They don't care about your well-being. They don't care about where you live. They don't care about your country, your family, nothing. Come join us and fight against the real terrorists. And that's where I find this lone positive of this missile attack, because it shows that even if it's not going to be a part of a further campaign to oust Assad and end this Syrian civil war and end the horrendous atrocities committed against the Syrian people, it shows that the United States is not going to stand idly by while these chemical attacks are conducted. So if you're the Syrian people, I mean, like I said before, you had Syrian civilians and Syrian people come out and cheer Trump about attacking the air base, even though it didn't really do a whole lot. It was kind of a symbol. It kind of creates this positive image for the West, because the whole basis of their recruitment tool was the West against the Muslim world in the Middle East. But if we show that this missile strike, we're trying to help the Syrian people, it doesn't matter whether they're Muslim or for the Middle East, they're human beings and civilians, and we care about them and care about their well-being and don't want to have these horrific chemical attacks committed against them. I think that this missile strike, if anything, brings good for the fight against terrorism. And the one thing I want Trump to change is his travel ban, because he's again pushed and pushed and pushed. He was part of his campaign rhetoric, still wants the executive order of the Trump travel ban. Everything I've said, it's just all opinion. Nothing is proven fact. I mean, I base my opinion around these facts, but if Trump saw the chemical attack, the results of it, launched the missile strike, and just had the mentality to show Assad that we're not going to put up with it, and you better not use chemical weapons ever again, or we're going to come at you even harder, and it's going to be a lot worse. And if it was all genuine and for the political strategy and the foreign policy strategy that they come out and say, even though there's usually always something going on behind the scenes, then I'm okay with that. But the one thing he has to change is he has to change his mentality when it comes to refugees, because you want to combat terrorism, you want to help defeat the mentality that festers terrorism, show that you have compassion and sympathy for people that are going on in this horrific civil war. I mean, you see pictures from Syria, buildings just demolished, for over 400,000 people have died in the Syrian civil war. God only knows how many are innocent civilians, women, and children. This foreign policy change needs to be a part of a grand plan in order to welcome Syrian refugees. And if we can show, as the United States and as really the biggest symbol of the terrorism view of the West, if we can show that we are compassionate and we want to show sympathy and we care about the well-being of this people, bringing them in and putting towards efforts and finances to bring them in and to get them out of the Syrian civil war and get them out of Syria while the war still rages on. That is how you defeat terrorism, by showing the Muslim world and the Middle East that we care. No matter where they are, no matter where they're from, no matter what God they worship, they have the same rights, liberties, and the same right to pursue happiness as we all do. That is going to be your main tool to fight terrorism. So there you have it, everybody. There are my opinions on the whole Trump missile strike situation. If you have any opinions on the missile strike itself, whether you thought it was a good idea, whether you thought it was a bad idea, whether you agree with my kind of conspiracy theory-esque of Trump launching this missile strike as kind of just this big distraction away from Trump and Putin bromance, if you think that it was all legit and that Trump was just seriously affected by the chemical weapon attack and he launched the missile strike sincerely, please let me know in the comment section below. I would love to discuss this with you. And as always, if you liked the video, go ahead and give it a like underneath that video and hit that subscribe button if you want to come back and see more videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Thanks for joining, everybody. We'll see you next time. Peace.